Today we are going to tell you how a rumor destroyed an orbital station. You might expect a story like that to begin with sabotage, with conspiracy, with someone somewhere making a very deliberate decision. It did not. There is a particular kind of destruction that does not announce itself. No weapon, no conspiracy, no villain worth the title, just a man in a corridor, a sentence he should never have heard, and a message he should never have sent. Welcome, Dreamwalkers. If you've stepped into this story, you're right where you need to be. I am Schmetterling.
And I am Dr. Atherstein.
And I am Pila. I am the human behind this perspective, and I am the human who has created these characters and their traits and, of course, the mystery that they are about to bring to you.
And I would note, for those who prefer their disasters to arrive with a clear point of origin, that this one will prove somewhat reluctant to oblige.
Ah, yes, the Doctor's gentle way of saying that I am about to build a story on foundations he does not entirely approve of.
And I would not say entirely, but I am beginning to suspect, Schmetterling, that you occasionally select topics precisely because they are built on what the younger generations might refer to as unstable informational terrain.
How delightfully modern of you, Doctor. Unstable terrain, no less. But let us delve in, because after all was said and done, after all the investigations concluded, and all the reports were filed, and all the fingers had finished pointing, they all pointed at the same man, Barnstoff. And so, dear curiosity mongerers, we bring you the Barnstoff Effect in 5 clues. We start with clue number 1, the setting, because every good mystery deserves a stage. Ours is an orbital station above one of the Empire's oldest worlds, the kind of place where the future is politely negotiated into existence across well-lit tables. Diplomats, transport officials, mining representatives, hundreds of them gathered in the orbital station called Harmony Hub above Arion, one of the Empire's oldest worlds. Old enough, in fact, to have been settled in the era when the first cradles were still being rediscovered. Those vast subspace relics whose origins, by the time of the Empire, no one had entirely agreed upon, and whose presence made travel between worlds possible at all. Arion had been existing with its cradle for a very long time. The people gathered in Harmony Hub that morning had every reason to want it to stay.
And the summit had been in preparation for several months. Representatives from 14 territories present, with a full diplomatic agenda, and by all recorded accounts, a productive first session already concluded.
The kind of morning, in other words, that gives everyone involved the quiet confidence that things are proceeding exactly as they should. Diplomats, officials, and, moving quietly through the spaces between them, the people who kept the whole illusion functioning, keeping things running, keeping things smooth, largely unnoticed. So yes, overall it was a wonderful morning for everyone, until it wasn't. This brings us to clue number 2. Every catastrophe, it turns out, deserves a protagonist. Ours is not a diplomat, not a decision maker, not anyone who had ever expected to matter in the slightest. So let us begin to shed some light on this mysterious nobody, Barnstoff. The man who heard too much but not enough.
And correlation, I will remind you, is not causation, though I suspect that will not slow us down.
Not in the least, dear Dr. E. Barnstoff was not a decision-maker, not a diplomat, not a figure of power of any discernible variety. He was a service worker in Harmony Hub's upper hospitality layers, a man who moved quietly and efficiently through the spaces where decisions were being shaped without being entitled to their contents. History has a peculiar habit of selecting its pivotal figures, not from the centre of events, but from their edges, where observation is possible but understanding is incomplete, and Barnstoff was, in this respect, rather well positioned.
And his access clearance permitted proximity to secured meeting zones, not the meetings themselves, which is to say he could observe timing, register atmosphere, and interpret the texture of a room without being in possession of anything that might be described as context.
And yet, As later investigations made rather uncomfortably clear, this is precisely what made it so powerful. Barnstoff came into possession of a fragment, not a conclusion, not a briefing, a fragment, stripped of everything Etherstein just described. No context, no framework, no understanding of what the room was actually for. And it was exactly that absence, that magnificent, catastrophic absence of context, that put in motion a chain of events no one at the time could have anticipated. Recovered security footage shows that on this particular morning, Barnstoff paused in a corridor. A corridor he had passed through 100 times before, a corridor with nothing remarkable about it except on this particular morning a closed door, and behind it voices. We cannot tell you why he stopped. He stopped. He listened, and then he sent the message. Clue number 3. How every chain of events deserves a first link. Ours is a message, 12 words, sent without hesitation, without verification, and without the faintest idea of what it would set in motion.
And within the recovered data from his personal device, a fragment of that message was identified. Incomplete, but clear enough in its intent to have caused significant downstream consequences.
The cradle will be moved. I heard it. I saw it myself. The treaty will be signed later today.
For those unfamiliar, a cradle is the Empire's subspace jump technology, the infrastructure that connects worlds. Move one, and you cut a territory off from the rest of the Empire entirely.
And what followed from this single unverified statement, distributed through informal channels to a small private group, was a cascade of independently reasonable decisions that, when viewed in aggregate, began to exhibit properties more commonly associated with coordinated action, despite the complete absence of any coordinating mechanism.
Doctor?
That under normal informational conditions would require explicit instruction, but in this case emerged entirely from shared...
Doctor, you have been here already. You are forgetting something.
Yes. No, what do you mean? What am I forgetting?
The breathing. You are forgetting the breathing and making an accelerated version where the explanation becomes longer than the event itself.
And I maintain that the explanation is proportionate to the complexity involved.
And I maintain that we have an episode to finish. In simpler terms, dear curiosity mongerers, Barnstoff's message landed in the hands of people who had every reason to be afraid of exactly this. Because the stories of what happens to worlds cut off from a cradle are not abstract. The economic collapse, the isolation, and something stranger still, withdrawal symptoms from the field itself, effects not yet fully understood by anyone, including the Empire. These were not irrational people making irrational decisions. These were people who believed with complete sincerity that their lives were under direct threat, and who did the only thing people in that position ever do. Whatever they could think of.
And what we might more precisely describe as an inferential commitment made in the absence of sufficient evidentiary support.
A lovely phrase, Doctor. One might almost mistake it for a polite way of saying jumping to conclusions.
And if one wished to be less precise, perhaps.
And once expressed without hesitation, without qualification, without the small and inconvenient scaffolding of doubt, it no longer invited discussion. It invited response. And this is where the threads start to get interesting. For clues 4 and 5, we turn to Fabricator 7, who, it turns out, filed a specific entry on this particular incident. It is titled, and we appreciate the economy, What is the Barnstoff Effect? It covers the wider conditions that made a single misheard sentence catastrophic, and what those conditions, once set in motion, actually produced. She will give you something resembling an answer. Listen very carefully.
It was a morning like any other at Harmony Hub, or at least like any other morning carefully engineered to feel that way, which is not quite the same thing. though most people rarely insist on the distinction when the lighting is agreeable and the temperature has been negotiated in advance. In the week preceding the summit, the station had experienced a minor disturbance of a different kind. A reporter had visited, well-known, widely followed, and possessed of that particular talent for asking questions that sound hypothetical while being received as imminent. The subject, as it was presented, concerned the potential relocation of a cradle. Not this one officially, though the distinction, it seems, did not travel quite as effectively as the question itself. Reassurances had been issued, context had been provided, and yet what remained was not entirely nothing. Which meant that when Barnstoff's message appeared, presented without location, without qualification, and perhaps most significantly, without doubt, it did not arrive into an empty space. What could be observed was a change in behaviour. Individuals who had not previously interacted began to move along similar paths. Independent decisions, made in separate locations, began to align in timing, if not in coordination. The objective, if it could be called that, was not explicitly stated, though in retrospect it appeared to orbit a single idea: delay. What followed was not a single failure, those are mercifully straightforward, but a convergence, which is what systems do when they decide, quite without consultation, to fail collectively. The automated systems began compensating. They did not fail, they ran out of options. The investigation concluded, with a certain administrative neatness, that the event was a convergence of unfortunate decisions. An accident. Exceptionally well aligned, but an accident nonetheless. Barnstoff himself was not available for clarification. Which, as records repeatedly demonstrate, tends to simplify conclusions considerably. However, the effect named after him came to its inevitable conclusion when, 5 years later, the Orion cradle was in fact moved, as the destruction of Harmony Hub had destabilized the area and its reputation as a place for peace was destroyed. In the years that followed, the term Barnstoff Effect entered quiet circulation, used to describe those situations in which a single, confident misunderstanding begins to organize the behavior of many, producing exactly those undesired outcomes. The Aryan cradle was later returned and renamed. Though that, as it happens, is another story.
Doctor, a station of that scale, that many interdependent systems, how does delay become destruction?
And the answer is unfortunately elegant. An orbital station of Harmony Hub's class would have been designed for efficiency. Tightly coupled systems, each dependent on the others, each compensating automatically for minor fluctuations. And this is precisely what makes such a system robust under normal conditions, and precisely what makes it catastrophically fragile under distributed stress.
Distributed meaning no single point of failure.
And no single point of intervention either. Each individual action taken by those aboard was small. A docking clearance withheld. A maintenance cycle interrupted. A power rerouting requested through informal channels. A regulation check postponed by, in one documented case, 40 minutes.
40 minutes.
And individually, irrelevant. The automated systems were designed to compensate for exactly this kind of minor irregularity. They began redistributing load, covering the gaps, and they continued doing so, correctly by every operational parameter, until the gaps became too numerous, in too many places, arriving too quickly for the redistribution to keep pace.
At which point the compensation systems failed.
They did not fail, they ran out of options.
What followed was not, strictly speaking, a disaster. Disasters implied that something had gone wrong. What happened to Harmony Hub was considerably more precise than that. Everything had gone right, in the correct order according to the relevant protocols, and then filed the appropriate documentation about having done so. The automated systems, to their considerable credit, did not fail. They compensated, they redistributed, They rerouted. They issued 17 internal alerts, each of which was addressed correctly by a system that was itself in the process of being correctly addressed by another system, which had flagged the concern to a third system, and so on. They ran out of options at 14:32 station time. The final log entry read, "Compensation cycle complete. Awaiting next instruction." No next instruction arrived. And perhaps this is the detail that lingers longest after incidents such as these. Not the explosion itself, not even the misunderstanding that preceded it, but the quiet insistence that there must have been someone arranging it all. Because a disaster like this feels as though it ought to have an author. And so the mind begins searching for hidden coordination, for missing actors, for the deliberate hand behind the apparently accidental, not necessarily because the evidence demands it, but because the alternative is somehow harder to sit with.
And this is not, it should be noted, an irrational response. Human beings demonstrate a strong and well-documented preference for intentional explanations over emergent ones, particularly in situations where outcomes appear structured, consequential, or emotionally disproportionate to their apparent causes. And the preference is not a failure of reasoning. It is, in most circumstances, a reasonable prior. Most consequential events do have authors. Most things that go wrong did involve a decision.
And here is the thing about order. It does not oppose chaos, it concentrates it. Every system ever built to reduce uncertainty, every network, every protocol, every carefully negotiated agreement across a well-lit table does not remove the instability. It compresses it, stores it, holds it in place with the assumption that enough minds are still sharing the same reality.
And what complexity theory would suggest is that order and chaos are not opposites in tightly coupled systems. They are the same variable, measured at different moments. And the more efficient the order, the more interdependent, the more finely tuned, the larger the release when coherence fails. And this is not a flaw in the design. It is the design.
The design, which means every system that has ever run beautifully, every empire, every city, every station humming along above a world that trusted it, was also, always, a question waiting to be asked.
And as with all observed systems, continued analysis will produce further variation.
Which is a polite way of saying the investigation is not entirely closed. Curiosity mongerers, wanderers of thought, you now know what the Empire officially recorded. You know what Barnstoff heard. You know what followed. What you do not know, what no one has yet been able to satisfactorily explain, is whether any of it was entirely accidental. And there is one final detail worth carrying with you. The cradle at Arion, the one Barnstoff believed was being moved, the one everyone acted to protect, was moved in the end. Not because of any treaty, not because of any decision made at Harmony Hub, but because Harmony Hub no longer existed to make decisions in. The thing they were trying to prevent happened anyway. 5 years later, for entirely different reasons. That question, like most of the interesting ones, has a habit of staying with you.
Be until next time.
And think carefully about what you believe.
History will record a decision that no one actually made. None of it is real unless you make it real.